Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the marketplace. My name is Daryl Kwao. Great to have you as company this afternoon. Coming up in the bulletin this afternoon, over 100,000 crates of eggs rotten at various markets and farms as Ghana experiences egg glut. Global food chain disruption during COVID-19. Several cocoa farmers hit hard as 3.5 million worth of cocoa gets stuck in Ghana. And COVID-19 continues to ravage economies and sovereign wealth funds are not left out. We'll take a look at how Africa is affected. We've got details of these stories and others in this half hour of business news. Welcome back, everyone. We begin from the poultry sector, and over 100,000 eggs sit on the farm gates and various markets in the Ashanti region, getting rotten as an egg glut hits the country. The Ashanti region has the largest population of large-scale poultry farmers. Now, COVID-19 is being blamed for the glut, and producers are appealing to government to pick them up. More in this report.
Ghana currently produces about 78 million birds, well, in the poultry industry. And guess what? Over 80% of these birds are layers. It means several eggs in the market in these COVID times. Here in this poultry farm, we have more than 40,000 crates of eggs right here. And that's about a week's production. Well, the birds cannot wait. Because of COVID times, it will mean that these farmers will have to find somewhere to send their eggs. And to the markets, they are not being picked.
We do have a problem because the market have been closed and the market women are not being allowed to sell their eggs. So it's causing us a huge problem.
What kind of problem?
Right now, for them to come for their eggs is a problem, and movements too is being restricted. Yeah.
So how many eggs do you have now? And ideally around these times, how many eggs would you have had?
We are having about 40,000 crates of eggs right now. And it's a big problem at this time. We are not able to sell them. Yeah.
At first, how many eggs would you have had by now?
At least we will have about 4,000 eggs of trays per day.
And so these 40,000 eggs are like eggs that have piled up for how many days?
For a week now. Yeah.
So what's going to happen? How are you going to dispose of these eggs?
If things don't change, we have no option. We don't know how to dispose these eggs for things to change. If things are to change, these eggs would have moved within a week. Yeah. Within a week, we will be able to dispose them off.
How is this affecting your cost of production? You were telling me that at first you were selling the eggs at a certain cost. You've reduced it. Tell us about that.
Because at first we thought the prices of the eggs were high. That's why we reduced it, but it's not the prices of the eggs. It's because of the market. Yeah. Right now the markets have been closed, that's why.
All those eggs, unfortunately. We'll tell you about how COVID-19 pandemic is affecting the cocoa industry in a bit. But first, we want to turn to Tallow. Tallow Ghana has announced that its managing director and executive vice president of Tallow Oil PLC, Aboagye-Wiafe, will be retiring from the company on the 30th of June. Aboagye-Wiafe will hand over his responsibilities to Wissam Al-Monthiri, who becomes managing director. Now, over the coming weeks, he'll be before leaving the business at the end of June. Now, Mr. Oche is the first managing director of Tallow Ghana to be promoted to executive vice president of Tallow Oil PLC. During his tenure, the 10 fields produces 58 million barrels of oil And there was very good progress in the TRP project, which is now in its final stages, with the oil offloading system being ready for installation. And his operations team have delivered significant improvements in the stable production of oil and gas from the company's two FPSOs. Wissam Al-Montiri, the man in your shots, the incoming managing director, brings to Tallow extensive experience of operations management, asset development, and a track record of safe production operations. He spent 17 years with BP in the various upstream operations leadership and asset management positions around the world. And moving on, the Electricity Company of Ghana has revealed it is deploying what officials call VIT technology to enable fault detectors identify exact location of emergencies. Managing Director Kwame Ajman-Budu says this has become necessary to address the intermittent power outages whenever it threatens to rain. It follows the company's announcement of 45 million Ghana cedis investment in short to long-term projects in the Ashanti region to address persistent power cuts.
We are also putting in place a mechanism whereby fault detectors are easy. In our current situation, to detect fault is like try and error. We don't have a system whereby it can pinpoint the exact location, especially when it comes to an underground cable. Even though we have a test van, the test van has to go to trial before it identifies. But we are trying to implement a new system called VIT, whereby you can sectionalize a portion of the where the fault is. Instead of the whole line going off, you can sectionalize the portion and just close the other end so that the other people on the other end can get service. We have put measures in place to make sure the service is stable and consistent. We don't understand, personally, I don't understand why when it rains, a section of the community will have lights, others will not. Why? We've come out to realize that there are some small issues like insulators, relays, and all that. We are now changing all our porcelain insulators to polymeric insulators. They are very quality and can sustain for a longer period of time. So in the near future, you all see the benefit of the polymeric. And also, as you saw from the presentation, there's a slight decrease, a steep one, from 2014 to 2019, and even to the first quarter of 2020. So we encourage our pressmen here, please, as you are our spokespersons, if you go out there, as we've explained to you, carry the message out, tell the public to exercise patience with us. We don't want anybody to sleep in the dark. And as a matter of fact, if the light goes off, it costs us money. If the light goes off, it costs us money because we want everybody to use the light so that we can get the money to pay our producers and suppliers.
Now, COVID-19 is ravaging our world in many ways we never imagined. State-owned investment vehicles, sovereign wealth funds have not been spared. Now, a report chronicling the impact of the pandemic on these funds by Confidence Advisory projects some losses of value in these funds globally and in Africa. Now, can we quantify these losses, and what's the way forward for countries such as Ghana, which rely on these funds? Joining me via Zoom is Michael Cotto, his managing partner at Confidence Advisory. Great to have you on the show this afternoon. Before we delve into the impact of COVID-19 on sovereign wealth funds, just for the benefit of our audience, what are sovereign wealth funds?
Well, thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to join you on the show. Sovereign wealth funds are simply state-owned investment vehicles that countries set up for the purposes of, either setting aside some of the country's wealth for purposes that the countries have determined to be strategic to their national development. So there are various types of sovereign wealth funds. The most common ones are sovereign wealth funds that are set up based on some natural resources. So you could have hydrocarbon. Majority of sovereign wealth funds are based on oil and petroleum resources. And countries will set up some of the funds for future generations, or they may set up some of the funds as a rainy day fund so that in crisis periods, they could draw on the funds to stabilize their economies.
So how are those funds being impacted by COVID-19 around the world and in Africa, really?
Well, the impact is very varied. The way COVID has disrupted the global economy in very diverse ways. And one of the key impacts of COVID has been the impact on commodity markets. So the crude oil markets have, fallen so dramatically. We saw just about a month ago, oil prices in the U.S. falling into the negative. We've never seen that before. Brent crude prices are still below $20 a barrel. And that's been a huge impact because most countries are in shutdowns. There's a lot of travel bans. Flights have been halted, and a lot of vehicles are not moving. So there's no demand for fuel. And therefore, you have a huge excess of supply of fuel that has not been taken up in the market. So oil prices are falling as a result of that. And because a lot of sovereign wealth funds, majority of sovereign wealth funds in the world are based on petroleum wealth, that has impacted the funds because typically every year when countries make a lot of money and make a lot of earnings from petroleum and hydrocarbon sales, they allocate some of those resources to these funds. So the funds are not going to be getting the resources that they would have in ordinary times earned from the sale of petroleum resources. That's the first impact. The second impact is that because a lot of these funds are designed to help stabilize economies when they're in crisis, a lot of governments around the world are drawing down resources from these funds in order to help stabilize their economies. So that's the second impact. So a lot of withdrawals from the funds. And the third one is that we've seen a lot of volatility in global stock exchanges. A lot of the sovereign wealth funds have invested in equities and all kinds of financial securities that have exposures to stock market volatilities. So that's the third impact, which is that a lot of the stock market volatilities are crashing the assets of a lot of these sovereign wealth funds. So we've seen three main impacts, and at Confidence, we've turned these three impacts as the triple drain on the assets of stock markets. They're losing money from the oil wealth that they get annually.
Right.
They're suffering, the investments are suffering from declines due to stock market volatilities. And governments are drawing down from these funds in order to stabilize their budgets and their economies.
And Michael, let's come home to Ghana because the Stabilization Fund has seen some withdrawals to fight COVID-19. And there has been a debate whether to withdraw from the Ghana Heritage Fund. Hope you followed that debate. What do you think will be the shape of these two funds by the time COVID-19 is over, if ever it will be?
Yes, so yes, you're right. So Ghana has withdrawn about 48% of the value of the Stabilization Fund. This is what the Stabilization Fund is designed to do. When the economy is in crisis, it's supposed to help stabilize, the fiscal situation. So it's a Stabilization Fund, so it's doing its work, and that's fine. The Ghana Heritage Fund is designed for a different purpose. It's essentially to help save wealth from Ghana's petroleum resources for future generations. And if you remember, in the very early days of the COVID crisis, when we had to go into early shutdown, the impact on government finances was very dire. And at the time, government was exploring all manner of options. And obviously, the Heritage Fund became an option to consider. I remember all the debates we had about whether to touch it or not. I think government has decided to put that on hold for now. One of the reasons why the Heritage Fund has not been touched is partly because the request that government made to the IMF and the World Bank has yielded some positive response. The $1 billion support facility from the IMF, I've seen the World Bank has frozen debt repayment by Ghana for some period. And we're still negotiating for some sort of bilateral and multilateral support from other kinds of donors and lenders. So I think all of these have helped provide the government with some fiscal space. And so I think that looking forward, I don't expect that government will make any withdrawals from the Heritage Fund. I think that it will be preserved. The Stabilization Fund, I think, it will depend. Everything depends on when the pandemic will be over. If the pandemic will be over soon enough, it's obvious that economies will begin to rebound. Oil prices will begin to go up back to pre-crisis levels. And we can have a recovery in most sectors of the economy. Government will begin to get its revenues and taxes. We'll begin to do shipping and exports of our commodities again. and government revenue will rebound.
Right.
If all of these things happen quickly enough, I don't expect further withdrawals to be made from the stabilization fund. However, if the pandemic prolongs for a very long time, if we don't get a vaccine coming in soon enough, if we're having multiple infection waves and disruptions to global supply chains and exports and trade cannot happen, withdrawals from the stabilization fund.
Right, Michael. And it's important you point out that it all depends on when the COVID-19 pandemic is over, because I was going to ask you about recovery and whether there's recovery inside. But quickly, what are the lessons for preserving sovereign wealth funds, even in these times of crisis? And what should governments be doing differently around the world, here in Africa and Ghana? If you could do that in a minute.
So, I mean, I think that by the time COVID is over, there'll be a lot of discussions around how to structure sovereign wealth funds to be able to help countries deal with crises of this nature. I expect that it's possible that after COVID, there might be different kinds of sovereign investment vehicles that are designed for disaster insurance. So we have stabilization funds, typically for macroeconomic, stabilization. I think that there might be a room for different kind of sovereign wealth vehicles that are designed around disaster insurance, and countries will be able to draw on those in special circumstances like this. COVID is a very particularly different kind of crisis, and sovereign wealth funds are not traditionally designed to deal with this kind of crisis. So I think the other lesson, and we're seeing some of the world's most powerful sovereign wealth funds doing strategic investments. A lot of the Gulf funds, Qatar, Saudi Arabia have been on a shopping spree. They're losing a lot of money. Globally, in the first quarter of 2020, sovereign wealth funds around the world lost about $1 trillion, mostly just due to stock market volatilities. Around the world, global stock markets hold about $8 trillion in assets combined. First quarter of 2020 alone, because of COVID, combined losses amounted to about $1 trillion. So a lot of the most powerful sovereign wealth funds around the world are rebalancing their portfolios. And what they're doing is, on a shopping spree, they're losing money, but they're also shopping for cheap assets, so that by the time COVID is over, they would have rebalanced their portfolios. Okay.
Thank you so much, Michael Koto. He is managing partner at Confidence Advisory. Thanks for your perspective this afternoon. Now, as the coronavirus takes its toll on global economies, I'm sure you've heard over and over again, cocoa farmers are making a case for Ghana to create local demand for industrial use of cocoa, so not to overly rely on international markets. Already, Chief Executive of Cocoa Board, Joseph Boahen-Edu, has revealed the pandemic has disrupted global chain of cocoa production, saying this will slow the acquisition of the $3.5 billion syndication loan for the 2020-2021 crop season. My colleague Charles Aite visited one of Ghana's largest cocoa farms to hear from cocoa farmers there.
This is Kobo Farms, a 45-hectare cocoa farm at Achimtafo in the eastern region. This farm will be harvesting 160 cartons of cocoa beans this crop season. But there is a problem. The novel coronavirus has led farmers here worried about the inability of their external buyers to engage in business. Samuel Tete Kobo owns this cocoa farm. He won the 2019 International Cocoa Awards. He took me on a tour through his cocoa farm. For him, the novel coronavirus calls for an urgent relook into the creation of local markets for cocoa farmers.
This challenge is worldwide. And for me, that's why I feel hurt when I come to realize that Ghana doesn't have a proper warehouse for storage of these things. But this could be the time where we could properly store a lot of these beans and again begin our own local processing. If we are not even going to sell the beans, let's break them down into a second grade, seed that is broken down into a second grade quality, okay? So that instead of exporting the seed that nobody is ready to buy now, we crack the seeds. We try to, roast them and make them something that can last. Nobody knows how coronavirus is going to last anyway. But if we can break them down and get them in a semi-processed form, and then we can store them, this will become so marketable going forward.
So you walk into the shop, and you talk to the consumer.
It is the season of, they call it a pruning season. You can see the leaves around. These are leaves that have been pruned to aid in air circulation across the cocoa farm. We get to interact more with the farmers. As you could see, they're also checking most of the things around and checking most of the leaves. We get to interact with them, especially when it is a very crucial season for them in terms of pruning and the cultivation of seeds. Busily trimming the branches of his cocoa trees, Amos, another cocoa farmer, explains the extent to which COVID-19 has disrupted his income.
COVID-19 ebae na aboye hu esan se koko eni ejuma yeye pa na mrofo nso enu na omudi ti vese na yare ni corona ya na ebisa ye hu se enti afi mpo no ebetimi ato ye koko ti enu na ye ai se aya adwen a ye adwene hu bebre wo yare hu ama skas kan wa ede san se Semre so emre akoko ensheda eni ho na kakra na ye titi no so no ye hu ska eni ho ma omo to no omo di abeto san se aban adwenyina wo yare hu ta ska ni ho ekuafo ebre.
For various cocoa farmers like that of Amos, the coronavirus is really having a toll on their line of duty. Yes, they are off-growers, but they are concerned about their livelihood, especially when the even imports of cocoa beans across the country and around the world has been somewhat stalled, especially when coronavirus has hit hard on countries that have huge thirst for cocoa beans here in Ghana. Plunging cocoa bean prices are not only threatening revenues, of which Ghana has already lost $1 billion in the past month and a half, but also stalling the government's current syndication process for loan facilities for the 2020 and 2021 crop season. This strains Ghana's renewed commitment to improve refinement processes and guarantee that over 50% of domestically produced cocoa beans will be processed. While difficult to estimate future import or export sales, the pandemic more broadly is continuing to disrupt global supply chains and affecting manufacturing companies around the world, a sector that contributes up to 10% of Ghana's GDP in 2018. I'm Charles Aite for Joy Business.
All right, some great reporting from Charles Aite. Just to remind you, the story on the egg glut amid the COVID-19 pandemic will show on AM Business on Wednesday at 7:15. Thanks for watching The Marketplace. My name is Darryl Kwao. More news on our website, myjoyonline.com/business.